There you are.
Hey, Brian.
We can see and hear each other, right?
Woo.
All right. This is an awesome start. Hello, mate. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. Wide angle view today. Let's not go into why. but we're here. Oh dear, oh dear. It's a beautiful day in Edinburgh. How is it for you, my friend?
It's beautiful in Cooper, in Fife.
All right. Well,
30 miles up the road from you.
That's good to know. That is good to know. So I think without further ado, shall we just get cracking on with this episode? I think that's a good shout for today, right?
I'm looking forward to this one.
I really am as well. So let's bring on our guest today. And our guest today is, let's get you in the right place, Luke, if we can. Oh, I can't make that happen, so you're going to sit there. I'm just going to have to point differently.
We're all here.
You'll have to go that way. Yeah.
No, that way.
It's inverted. Yeah. Welcome, Luke. Today we have Luke Beckley with us today, and Luke and I have a bit of potted history, which we'll talk about a little bit in the recording. But welcome, my friend. Thank you for clearing your diary for us today. We really appreciate it.
It's an absolute pleasure, as always, to speak to you both. Yes, that potted history no doubt will come out at some point, but thank you both for allowing me to come and talk to you, and B, for inviting me on to do this section of the show as well. I'm very excited, so thanks.
Oh, you're really welcome, my friend. And I think just as a little taster, one of the big things that we're going to talk about today, a little bit further down the line, is data posture, right? And I know this is something you've been touring the country with, Luke, right? Pretty much since we had the pre-record, for sure.
Yeah, that's right. I was very fortunate enough to get a slot at the Information Record Management Society's annual conference last week, and shared the stage with two incredible humans, which are Catherine Brooks and Claire Patterson, and you've met Claire because you were at our Hive event last year. And we did a whole session on data posture and what that means to us and how that kind of lives in our world of data protection, data governance. So that's the plan. Roadshows, here we come.
And such a topical subject at the moment. I've had countless conversations with people who want to get down the road to making more use of their data, and are asking, where do we start? And I think, Luke, you've got the answers to a lot of these questions.
That's very kind. Well, I'm trying my best.
There's a bold claim. There's a bold claim, and we're going to find out during the taping how accurate that is.
Exactly. So hold that thought.
So, Luke, thanks to everyone who's joined in and who's with us live as well. We really appreciate you being here. We're going to play a recorded interview with Luke now, where he's going to answer lots of these questions. That's going to last for about 40 minutes, so we'll still have a good 5 or 10 minutes at the end to have a bit of a chit-chat about everything that's happened. So, without further ado, everyone, we're happy to present you with Season 2, Episode 2 of the Data Mix with Luke, Brian and George. So we will see you very shortly. We will be picture in picture as well, hopefully. So we will see you then. All right. Cheers, everyone. See you soon.
Thank you.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and all you lovely people. We've, after some technical hitches, we are here with another episode of the Data Mix. So welcome. I am Brian, and this guy over that way, yes,
is George. Nice to meet you again.
Yeah, nice to meet you again. Yeah, it feels like that sometimes, doesn't it? Yeah, how have you been, mate? You okay?
Pretty good, yeah. Unfortunately, I'm in a sterile office down in London today, but we've got a really interesting guest today, so hopefully the focus is not going to be on my sterile office.
Well, you've mentioned it now, so it could be, but no, I know you're doing a lot of traveling this week. Personally, I've got holidays coming next week, so I can't wait. I'm escaping to the far reaches of northern Scotland for a little while, so really looking forward to that. But to the task in hand, obviously, fantastic to record these episodes with you, mate. And I'm really keen to get our next guest on. And it's someone that I've known for quite a wee while, and you guys have had time to acquaint each other and meet each other. So I'm gonna bring him on just now. So for our episode today, we have Luke Beckley here. So Luke, nice to see you. How are you doing?
I'm very well, my friend. How are you? Good to see you both.
That's good.
Yeah, welcome, Luke.
Yeah,
nice
it's
to see you again.
Yeah, nice to see you again. Nice sterile office.
Yeah, and we've had a couple of attempts at getting this off the ground through various technical issues. So it's great to finally be here, Luke. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, mate, and how we've came to be? Because obviously we've got a little bit of history, but give us a little bit of intro, if you don't mind.
No problem. I won't go into all the details, but we basically met through LinkedIn, basically through a LinkedIn party that Leah Turner hosted down in London. We got talking about data, and I think basically we talked about that for about 8 hours, in between some refreshment.
Yes.
And
sounds like a beautiful love story. Match made in
it was
heaven.
the start of something beautiful, George. You're absolutely right. And
Absolutely.
and then we've chatted since then. So my background just did analytics for a long time. So I'm a Cognos boy. I'm sorry, not a click boy. But we're talking about data today, so we can park that for a while, and then transitioned into the data protection, data governance space about 2017. So yeah, there was a lot of demand around that time, but it was a natural flow for me to sort of move into that space. So I'm in between either Jedi or Sith. I'm not sure where I sit at the moment. I'm probably a bit of an Anakin, but like there's some good, there's some bad. So depending on whose viewpoint you're looking at it from. So that was kind of that's in a nutshell my background.
Yeah, look, I think that's amazing, and we're definitely going to talk about some of those topics in more detail. But just a little bit of a back reference to that party, right? I think it probably was about 8 hours all in by the time we got from the start to the finish.
Well, it was a quite early finish, let's say that. And when I say early, I don't mean in the afternoon.
Yeah, it got a bit crazy, but it's stories for another day. But I also found out about your tennis background there as well, Luke, when that was going on, and with the other Leah as well, Leah Bellion as well. We were all chatting about tennis for a little while. So how's that all coming along?
Yeah, it's still progressing. So I'm currently going through my LTA coaching qualifications now, assisting down at the local club with our head coach Sarah, who's just had her birthday. So if she ever watches this, happy birthday, Sarah. And I'm loving it. Ultimately, that's kind of where I want to end up. I want to be doing some coaching fairly regularly, and then supplementing that with consultancy work, because I just love data. So I kind of I won't be able to stay out of it, right? So I know that.
But that sounds like a perfect work-life balance.
Yeah. Well, you say that until you've got 15 sort of 8 and 9-year-olds running around, and they've all just come out of school on sugar. That's quite an interesting scenario, trying to get them to then hit a tennis ball. But I do enjoy it. It is good fun. So yeah,
I can relate to that, and I also aspire to your life goals of tennis activity first and data second. But I think we're all still got to work a little bit harder until all that becomes a reality for all of us.
Yeah,
but with that tenuous link back to data, Luke, obviously that was extremely tenuous. But we are the data mix, so we're here to talk about data. So give us a little bit of a retrofit of the types of things that you're involved in your day job, not the tennis side.
Okay, so currently I am, as you've got captioned there, the DPO and head of privacy and data governance for a company called Corella. Corella are a data and tech org who effectively are supporting through their systems and managed services pretty much most of the gas data that is available in the UK. So there is very large volumes, there is lots of analysis work going on with it, there's lots of personal data involved, and that's kind of where I am focused mainly on making sure that we are compliant in that space, that we're doing the right things with the data, that we're collecting it for its specific purposes, that we are trying to minimize the amount of data that we capture. We are obviously keeping it secure, and our security posture is good. We'll get onto the posture conversation in a second. And so that's my kind of, from a day-to-day, is just making sure that the programs that we've got running, the data that we're capturing, the use of that data is compliant with the regulations, looking after how we onboard suppliers and the use of data or our data as part of their processes that they are doing on our behalf. So there's a contractual review element that comes as part of that as well. And just making sure that we, from a data protection perspective, we are respecting our individual rights in relation to privacy and basically data protection in relation to our human rights as well. So, minimizing the potential and mitigating the risks of harms to individuals with the processing that data. So yeah, it's and then there's the governance piece. Then there's actually managing the data itself, right? So we've got a whole heap of information sat around the business, unstructured stuff, SharePoints, you name it, and kind of just becomes its own behemoth. But without governance around that in terms of standards, naming conventions, structure to where that data is stored and how that's stored, you just end up with, a cyclical kind of like data protection problem, because then you're into retention. So every day is different. But
yeah. So, Luke, what part of the organization do you sit in then? Are you in a governance function reporting to a head of governance?
So we are, so we report into the chief operating officer, and above me is the director of risk, security and assurance.
Right.
And then alongside me sits a head of information security and a head of audit and risk. And we've then got teams beneath us doing each of those different functions. So it is, I have to say, one of the best structured setups from a governance perspective that I've seen in an org for quite some time. There is a genuine buy-in to, we want to do the right thing and we want to make sure we're doing the right thing. So, those two things are very different. Your ethical standpoint about, yes, we want to do the right thing, but then you go off and kind of like sell a load of data out to people, or you capture a load of data that you don't need and you process that and retain it for years and years and years. Those things don't, you can find one or the other in most organizations. But what, excites me about Corella is they've bought into, yes, we want to do the right thing, and we're putting a team together and a structure together that facilitates us doing the right thing.
Yeah. So sorry, Brian.
You go, George, you go.
So I presume then you spend quite a bit of time designing policy, potentially looking over the shoulder of the data architect. Hopefully they're pulling you into meetings, and there's some sort of process there where they're going to ask for your either permission or opinion piece on data that they're either trying to capture or transform in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. Both of those really. So yes, me and my team are responsible for obviously data protection policy. We get involved in things like the acceptable use. Obviously, the retention schedules and retention policies sit with us. But then equally, you've got to get into tracking the data flows, because we are effectively a processor for other data controllers. So, but we've also got our commercial aspect, which is how do we sometimes repurpose that data for additional services that we can provide, or extensions of our products that could service different markets. But of course, you've got to get into an understanding of the data flows then. So down from our customers, we have certain agreements in place with some of our customers that we can repurpose that data, but obviously doing that under very specific circumstances. There's a data permissions requirement around that, but of course that requires your understanding of lineage. And so, I am still trying to get my head around it, because it's the gas market is quite a complex area, but that process is getting, more and more, becoming more evolved, and it's something that I'm implementing quite stringently now, as in like we've got development meetings that I'm putting in place with the product owners, just so that I understand their roadmaps and what data we're going to start pulling into different solutions, and do we have the right permissions to do that, and if we do, then what are we going to append to that data set, right? What additional data are we going to pull in that suddenly takes that from kind of like a there's no true anonymization, but like a de-identified situation to suddenly now we can pinpoint, this set of houses and the individuals who are in those houses, but we haven't got their name or any contact details.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the bit where I kind of really want to get involved and make sure that we then are staying compliant. So it's this kind of perpetual kind of like circular movement of understanding and data and back and forth to make sure that we don't inadvertently put out we've got an open data set to do some analysis work on, like gas shipping across the northwest, but because of a mix of things, we've inadvertently sort of said, but we can identify which supplier supplies these houses. Do you know what I mean? You then get into not only is the personal data element there potentially a problem, but the commercial impact of another supplier finding out who the exact houses that their competitors are supplying. So it's kind of, it's a complex thing.
It does sound like a complex thing, and I think if I were to relate because all of that stuff that you talked about is all completely like relevant and important, but I think it almost circles back to one key point, which is enablement, right? It's getting your data to be enabled in the right way to serve the purposes that you need it to, sort of legally and within your business as well, to do the things that you need to do. So I find this like topic of enablement of data quite interesting, both from a governance standpoint and how it practically works in a business, but maybe less on that practical part and how what are the kind of things that we can think about, and what do we actually mean by data enablement? I think you've actually probably given us some examples already, but why don't you tell us a bit about that? What that means to you, Luke?
Well, because I think you kind of we operate still, and I hopefully you're going to tell me it's changing, but I still see it, that this siloed approach to the use of data. So you have people who are kind of like doing the collection piece, and then they're dropping massive amounts of data, but they don't really understand what data they need. So what they've done is collected everything, and then suddenly you've got a huge amount of data that gets handed over to the developers, and they're like, oh, that's great, we've got lots of data, but what's our purpose and what's our output? And so this kind of set of visualizations, whatever it might be, is trawling through vast quantities of data without actually understanding the purpose for which was originally collected. And then along the way, you've got all the different compliance elements that you've got to take into account. And I think they operate in silos and in almost like parallel universes to a degree. And so for me, the data enablement piece is about, how do I make sure that this particular piece of data or data set has all of those different elements around it in order for us to drive the value from it, and therefore enable the company, the person, to really get that value from the end result. So why are we collecting it? What's our output? Let's analyze that data flow through its life cycle. Then what are the compliance risks that we've got around this? How do we mitigate for those? And therefore, can we move that data onto like the next kind of step, so that we know that by the end of it, the enablement process has said, yes, we know what data we want. Yes, we've gone out and collected it compliantly. Yes, we have merged it with other data sets, but we've also ensured that we've met our compliance obligations. And now we're still focused on the output. And now how do we deliver the output in the best way for the customer, whatever tool that might be? Click is one of the best ones, I accept. But so how do we do that? And that whole framing of data for me is that enablement process, which it still feels like you've got people in specialisms not really understanding either the sequence that's required and the interoperability of those elements.
Yeah. What do you use any tools then to support you from sort of understanding that lineage all the way from collection and what you're collecting all the way through to end usage? How are you tracking that?
Manually at the moment. So,
but I think that's relevant, Luke, because a lot of businesses are in the same boat, right?
Yeah.
And just to add on to George's point slightly, this topic is something that we're quite familiar with, but only elements of it, right? The visualization part, the data collection part, probably the part that we're not as involved in most of the time is that governance part, and that,
yeah,
are we meeting our compliant obligations? And I think that's the facets of a data professional that are changing all the time, right?
Yes.
But sorry, I just wanted to add that on to the point that George was making, that some of it familiar, but some of it equally is not on a day-to-day basis for a lot of us on the field. So
yeah, and there are tools out there that will do that from a lineage perspective, and some of them are very specific. So, the one that sticks out for me privacy-wise is like Privado, which allows a data lineage and looking at the actual code to make sure that, if I've identified some personal data elements, can we anonymize those or pseudonymize those, however that might be. Again, that's an investment requirement, and it's quite a hard sell still because people are still viewing it as data protection and data privacy and as data compliance, not part of an enablement process to drive the value from the data. And I think that's the complexity I find, that then you end up relying on manual means, right? So you get an architecture diagram, which we've got, then you start looking at what are the data flows that go through that, and you're trying to track them. But then I'm kind of trying to then capture that in the record of processing so that I understand what data we've got in which systems and how that data is being secured. But at the meantime, this data is kind of running along here to its final output, and the compliance team are trying to kind of keep up. And at some point they go, hang on a second. And that's because that whole process, is manual, and so there's no flags going up. They're running at slightly different cadences, and so you end up with a whole heap of spreadsheets and other process maps that you're trying to overlay on each other to make sure that ultimately you get to use a nice, clean, purpose-driven data set for the output that you're looking for. But yeah, I'm still seeing a lot of manual work at the moment.
Yeah, well, we haven't actually recorded this episode yet, but on episode 1, we have Miles Sewer, who actually comes from a data privacy company. And what I'm hoping is that this season we can do a deep dive into some of the tools, because you're right, there are a lot of tools out there for data privacy, data lineage, etc. And it would be good to have somebody on where we can actually deep dive into that topic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but I don't envy your job there, and I think it is, as Brian says, it's a hurdle for the whole industry at the moment. It's something that's we're creating so much data every single day. It's right that you mentioned that some of this data, we got to understand why we're collecting it, because I guess the mere fact of collecting it, having data that you're not going to use, or thinking we'll just keep that in a safe place in case we need it in the future, that's a risk.
It's a risk and not compliant. You've got to have the purpose. So you back to the 7 principles, right? One of which is purpose limitation. Why do we need data, and what data do we need? And then you've got data minimization, which is only collecting the data that you need for that purpose. And you're right, a lot of companies do that. Well, we might need it. I have an example, a very quick one, where we were trying to talk about a sales process, and I'm going to try and not name names, a sales process, and the team came and fortunately got us involved early on and said, right, we want to collect some names because we've got this product to sell. Great. So what are you going to do with that data when we've got it? Oh, well, we'll leave it on the database. Well, for how long? We're not engaging with them. Oh, probably about 18 months. Well, then why? Surely you've planned a campaign to keep them engaged. Well, no, we just want to collect names and just hold it. And we'll hold it in case we need it. But we might restart the process 6 months down the line if the product changes. And you think, right, how many of these principles do you want me to talk to you about? And that is, we're still on the topic, that is the enablement piece, is really understanding, there were so many things that they could have done with that data set. You could have collected it for a true engagement campaign. We want to keep people actually active, we know we've got product. The product is long-term development. So how do we keep people engaged? Well, you can do that through a whole heap of things for which you've then got purpose. You're just collecting the data that you need, and you're ensuring that you're not storing it for any longer than required. They either withdraw their consent, or, you know, they email in and say, you know, actually, we're not interested in this product ultimately anymore, so take me off the mailing list, order it out of your database, and that's done. But that kind of disconnect is still happening a lot, I'm finding, in external to Corella, because I'm working on that. In the organizations. The
temptation's always there to collect that data, because, you know, storage is cheap, and, you know, you can put that into a lake in an unstructured way at the moment, and then figure out in the future what you're going to do with it. So from a technical point of view, it's easy. But yes, then all the other sort of governance issues come in.
Yeah, exactly.
And look, just curious on this, but do you think that in some people's eyes that makes data protection seem like a bit of a barrier or a bit of a blocker? Because if I don't come to them, then I don't have to. It's kind of the ultimate paradox, right? If I don't go and talk about the data that I need to talk about, then maybe I don't need to talk about it, and I don't need to explain why I'm doing what I'm doing. So do you think there is a bit of a misconception that, because, like, totally honestly, a lot of us out there still think data protection is GDPR and that's it, right? That's what a lot of perception is that's out there. So what are your thoughts on that?
That is definitely still the impression and misconception. So I use this term called data protection by stealth, right? And my friend Claire Patterson, who I've done an actual presentation called From Blocker to Builder on, an event a couple of years ago, was to talk about actually two things. One is how to get our message across, and B, look at all the additional skills that a data protection person in your organization actually has. They're business analysts, right? They're stakeholder managers. They are project managers. They are data analysts, right? They've got all of these additional skills that actually, so a bit of the onus is on us as well as data protection professionals to sort of kind of talk about our other skill sets, probably before we talk about the fact that we understand the different regulations under which we operate. Because
is that how you get, as a data protection professional, is that how you get the link into the business, right? You give a little bit of, right, okay, I understand what you're doing in your process, and this is how we need to sort of massage that and manage that.
Yeah, exactly.
But basically make it compliant, right? Without you putting too fine a point on it.
And that sales process I was talking about is exactly what we did, right? So I didn't talk to them at all about data protection. So I was sat there as like a privacy specialist at the time, but I was working on the fact that I'm a data analyst, and I understand data, and so I'm talking to them about the process and about what it is that you want to achieve with the data that we collect, and then just asking them, like, well, why do we need that? Why do we need that particular piece? Why do we need their full postcode? If we're not going to do anything with it, we probably don't need it. And actually, so let's just focus on the email address and their address, and maybe some other profile information that's relevant to the product. So let's collect that. And as you're going along, you're kind of, by default, implementing data minimization, because I'm saying you don't need the postcode, we don't need all of that, or we don't need this particular piece of data. And actually that creates a problem in the process flow. So let's strip that back out. And then let's talk about, like, engaging with them. So let's not just hold it for 18 months, because as a customer of a potentially big purchase, I might want to understand what's going on with my product over an 18-month life cycle. So what do we want to do? How do we want to keep them engaged? Oh, well, maybe we could send them a newsletter every month or do X, Y, Z. That's brilliant. Suddenly, we've got purpose. We've got purpose for collecting that large set of data. We've minimized that data, right? And now we just get into being transparent about what we're doing with it. But that's just like that's the tick box bit. That's do we have privacy notice? Are we collecting the consents properly? Or we can add those onto the form on the website. That's dead easy. And so what I've done is not once mentioned GDPR and fines. That's not what it's about. I've talked to them about getting to their end result with the data set that they've got. And I think that's the shift in narrative. And I'm seeing it. A lot of the data protection professionals that I'm in contact with and part of that community are really thinking about how do we reposition not only ourselves, but data protection and privacy as this enabling factor in an organization, right? Back to the enablement piece, we become an enabler of data because we start talking about those principles of GDPR, which I think are brilliant building blocks, right? And some of them exist in the things that we do. So there's the purpose, data minimization, storage limitation, accountability, lawful fairness, transparency, all of these kind of things are things that we'd work within, data analytics in the data analyst space.
I mean, first of all, wonderful job in being able to reel all of those things off at the same time. Clearly, you know your job, because that's always a hard thing to reel off the things that are key to your job. But I think what you say is really valid about the way that, as an organisation, you carry yourself and the way that you project yourself, and you might say the way that you posture yourself as well. We physically do it on calls. We sit a certain way. We're not. Well, most of the time we're not sitting like this because it shows that we're bored. We want to have that outward, that outward impression of how we are perceived to an organisation, right, and how open we are to be malleable and to be able to do things in a way, like you say, that is sometimes soft and not always the hard line. Okay, we must be compliant with GDPR. We must have the tech, but it takes more than that, right? It's about the way that you posture yourself. So I know that's something that you wanted to mention as well about posturing with data. So what do we mean by that?
Well, so I think organizations are going to become judged on. So we talk about information security or security posture, but to me that encompasses a large part, but a large element of how you as an organization use, manage, secure the data under which you've been effectively given guardianship, right? Especially from a personal data perspective, because it's the individual's personal data, right? It's not yours. You don't suddenly own it because you're processing it through a load of systems. I can come to you and I say, I want access to all my data. And under certain circumstances, I can say, I want you to delete it. So companies, and especially from a kind of like the ESG scenario, the environment, social and governance piece that's coming around, how they understand and treat data, I think, and therefore for me their data posture is, do we understand how to collect this properly? Are we doing it with to build customer trust at the forefront of what we do? And part of that posture is we collect data in a particular manner, right? So we make sure that we have looked at the lawful basis for which we're collecting your data, and we've applied the principles in an effective manner that make sure we don't over collect the data, that we do delete it when we don't need it any longer, that we've collected it for the specific purpose, that we know who is accountable for that particular set of data as it flows through the organization to its final output and destinations. And then you've got and how are we securing that data? Back to the security posture piece, which feeds into our data posture. And so ultimately, I think we will come round to people looking at it as a more holistic data posture, as opposed to just what people at the moment seem to perceive, which is, if we've got information security in place, then my data's fine. It's like, well, not necessarily, because we could be amalgamating with other data sets. We could be inferred data just by different pieces of collection that we do from various collection points. And if you're not really sure about what is being collected as an end consumer or customer, I think the feel is that you're going to get really concerned about that. Not just is it secure, but what are you doing with it, and why are you doing that with it? And that to me is the posture, is the data posture of an organization is going to become the term that encompasses the security posture, but as well as all of those other elements of those questions that are going to get asked about, what do you do with it? Why are you doing that with it? How are you making sure that it's compliant? How can you tell me you're not transferring it to other third parties? What inferred data have you collected on me? Right? That's nothing to do with information security or your security posture. It's to do with your approach to the data that you collect.
And at the moment, I don't know of any metrics out there that independently assure a consumer or somebody externally that an organization is looking after your data. There's lots of security. There's lots of metrics for people's cybersecurity rating, and independent ones as well. So you can be independently verified, which can then give trust, but not specifically for data. Is that something you think then should or could be coming down the line?
I would love that it does, and I know that there are. I suppose that the baby step or the starting place for that is the data maturity indexes that are out. So there's lots of data maturity models out there, but again, it's back to this, our enablement things and things running slightly in silos. That the security situation, security postures, maybe slightly outside of that data maturity situation. It's kind of not embedded. It's back to how, again, the governance piece, how well your data, how clean is the data, what's your accuracy levels, those types of things are all part of that maturity model, but not necessarily with the security piece plugged in. So I think there is a definite need for it. I haven't seen, like you, George, any tools out there that are doing it as a holistic data posture situation. They'll look at it as maturity, but not necessarily that overall thing, which I think will ultimately plug into your, like I said, the governance requirements around ESG and reporting that are going to expand over the next few years exponentially, I think.
Yeah, because a security audit would certainly say, well, this data is secure and it's not easily hackable, but it wouldn't say, but they're retaining your data too long, and they're retaining data that they don't have any need for, etc. So these sorts of things are not then looked at. So how ethical you are with that data?
I think it's hard to put a measurable on something that is so could be so different between every organisation, and I think putting a framework around that puts a KPI around it is always a tough thing to do, right? And the other thing I would say here is that we talk about the maturity of businesses in lots of episodes that we do, and the cruel, harsh reality of the world at the moment is that many businesses are not in this position where they even have that first layer, that foundational layer in place in a kind of repeatable and reliable and robust way. So to them, it's still a long way off, and we all work on projects all the time where we see, yes, that definitely should be done, but how many times is it pushed down to a stage 2, stage 3, stage 4 type of process while we just sort of baseline what we're doing? And ultimately, that's a long journey, right, Luke? I know, and ironically, we don't have that much time to talk about it, but it is a long journey.
It is.
To get to that point. And this isn't something we can solve in a podcast that just says, so just define your data posture, but it is something that we need to be talking about more. And that's why I think you're very important to be on this episode.
Yeah,
well, that's very kind.
And I think that the penalties for getting it wrong are already there.
Yes.
Luke, you know better than me what the fines are. And I think the UK, even though we're out of Europe, we're still subject to very similar.
We have the UK GDPR that got kind of embedded into our exit, and so we're still operating under that. So the fines are still, like, the ultimate fines are still, £17 million or 4% of your global turnover. You've got to be exceptionally bad to fall into that realm, though. So, but there are a whole heap of other regulations, like the Privacy and Electronic Communications regs, which governs how you go about marketing, right? Email marketing, and that requires you to gather consent, but only in certain circumstances. So I won't get into the nuances of that, but like, there's a whole heap of these regulations that are still applicable to pretty much most of the data that is consumed, right, and is brought into an organization to develop services and product. So
Yeah, I think that ultimately the reason to talk about it is that we have a responsibility, right? I sound a bit like Spider-Man here, great responsibility and all that, but we have like a social responsibility to make this happen, right? It's not something that we can just say, well, we'll leave that to the DPOs, because they don't infiltrate all organizations, and most organizations don't care to this level about what they're doing from that perspective. They should, but maybe they don't. So I think it's kind of on all of us, right, to make this happen and to raise these issues. And I think data posture should be a Luke Beckley TM, to be honest. But that's what I think. So
I'll see if I can get it.
Yeah, but what do you think, George? That whole social piece of us all being able to promote that, regardless of whether we're a security or a privacy or a governance professional or someone completely outside of that circle, right? It's important.
100% agree with you, Brian. And it comes down to, it's almost part of the data literacy piece. If you're going to educate your organization on how to use data for all of the good things you can get, you also need to be taught how to use it ethically and what these are. And that's I know for a fact that not all organizations, in fact, it's a minority of organizations that are actually doing that. So I think for now, it's really important that people like you are, shouting this from the rooftops, within organizations, because otherwise people are just going to, they might have good intentions, but they're going to accidentally get their organizations into deep water.
Yeah, agreed. And I think an extension of that then is the smaller micro companies, the social enterprises, the smaller charities, that they're at that kind of weird, almost V shape. They're up here in this kind of matrix, which is high risk and low capability, right? And they don't have a me, they don't have an us to help them understand how to drive that value and make sure that it's all done compliantly. Yet many of them are processing some of the most sensitive data about individuals without understanding the potential impact, not only on them, but the real harm from not having their spreadsheet protected properly, or it's sat on an unencrypted laptop, right? And it's got addresses of domestic violence victims that they're helping to support. I mean, and all they're trying to do is provide that support, and that is incredible, the work that is being done. And so I think there's also like, I'm trying to formulate whether it's going to work or not, but almost like a volunteer program from data professionals to try and help those types of organizations who have got no possibility of funding what is a required program to make this actually work, to give them good data posture, right? So there's a responsibility there that I think, I've had various conversations with people and they're thinking it's a good idea. And I'm doing some work with the East London Business Alliance right now, and on a volunteer program, they've got lots of these social enterprises, and I'm doing a session a month with another volunteer, a guy James Green from SocGen, to sort of try and help their small companies and social enterprises and charities just get an understanding of data. So back to the data literacy piece, George, right? We're trying to just teach them about it and the potential harms of what could happen if you don't really understand what you're collecting and what you're doing with it.
I think that's an amazing full circle back to what we started with, Luke, in terms of that enablement, and certainly it rings true in our areas. Data literacy often gets monikered as things that it's not supposed to be as well. So that's why being able to label this as data posture, data enablement, those types of phrases is super important. Luke, I can't believe I'm looking at the timer, and I just literally can't believe how quickly this has gone. It's been so amazing to have you on here, and I think, as always, it gives us a massively different perspective from what we know or understand or interpolate in terms of, and I think a lot of our listeners and a lot of our viewers feel the same way. George, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the reason we do this is just to open our eyes and our minds to what we all don't know. Data is such a vast minefield, I think. And this point here about data posture, and then moving into the sort of social responsibility of that. Ignorance will not be any help to us, if we put a foot wrong here. So I guess it does come on us at the grassroots. When a manager says, "Can I have that data extract, please?" We should probably be questioning that. We should definitely be questioning that. But yeah, Luke, thank you for opening our minds to this and putting it high up there on the agenda. Thanks for your time today.
It's been an absolute pleasure and honour to come on and speak to you both. So thank you very much for inviting me on. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm sure we will continue these conversations for a long time.
Absolutely.
It sounds fantastic, Luke. And before we close out, again, hopefully we might get you along to our live part of this as well when it all goes out. But it's been fantastic to have you, mate, and we wish you the best of luck with the tennis coaching and spreading the word of data posture, the very important words. I don't know which is more important, equally so. But thank you again to all our viewers and listeners, and we look forward to continuing the conversation in the live episode coming up soon. Thanks very much, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Bye-bye.
Well, look, everyone gets a bonus outro out of this episode as well, which can't be a bad thing because it's one of the best things about our episode structure is our intro outro. Luke, it's wonderful to have you here, like watching back the episode with us, and I think it's always interesting doing a pre-tape and then watching it back. And apart from the obvious things of, oh God, I looked this way, what were your thoughts watching that episode back? What were the things that really stuck out to you on that?
The one thing that stuck out was our experience, the way that we were all nodding a lot in that episode. So we've all come across these problems, and I think this scenario for me is just wonderful because it's cross-functional, right? The three of us have got I've got different skill sets, but in the same arena, and for us to be having this conversation is just. I can't envisage this would have happened even just a few years ago, right? So it's great that we're starting this ball rolling to really get a cross-functional within the data space team and understanding to be able to then push that out across the organizations we work with. I think that for me is the key bit, and actually how much we enjoyed the conversation. I think we all had a great time despite the technical hitches that we had getting ourselves into that place.
We've been bugged this season. I don't know what's been going on, but that rings true, right, George, in terms of Luke's comments there, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's I think once you're in the conversation, like we were chatting a lot to each other, and just being able to sit and listen back to it, actually, I learned a few things. And actually, I've just realized that I made a commitment there that we're going to have an episode at some point where we deep dive into the governance tools. I'd completely forgotten about that, but I've taken a note, and I would really like to do that, actually. I know a couple of people in the data governance software industry, so hopefully we can do that. But it's a very fast moving industry that we're in, and hugely interesting. And I think everything starts from here. I'm preaching to the converted, I know, but if we don't get things right at this level, then everything else that we do on the back of it is going to be sort of house of cards, isn't it? If we don't get these structures right at the foundation level.
Well, I mean, we touched on it before this episode, and I'm just going to just bring it up. The RMS conference that I was at last week. Again, Claire is on, so I was very fortunate to present with Claire and with and Catherine Brooks, both of whom are fantastic, about data posture, and we've kind of honed it since our conversation. So we've basically got 4 kind of elements to it, one of which of course is a security posture, but then you've got your actual data governance, you've got your ethics, and and just trying to bring all of those elements together is, for me, the bit that we've really got to sort of drive from, like you said, this grassroots level.
But I think encapsulating all of that in a nice term, data posture, is a nice place to start, because it then gives us a vocabulary to use as we're actually trying to talk about this and sell the benefits of this to our colleagues in the industry.
Exactly. Yeah.
I've talked previously about interactions with Jordan Morrow, who used to be the head of data literacy at Click, and his thing was always understanding the language of business, right? And it's just critical, especially when you're in this cross-functional type of conversation. And the other thing I just want to add to this is that we don't want a DPO's job when they arrive somewhere to be an emergency rescue situation, right? And I have a feeling that when DPOs get drafted in a lot at the moment, that not quite to the point where it's, you know, GDPR uncompliance or anything like that, but a bit like, well, we don't really have a solid footing for you to start, but can you sort of unpick what's happened in the past and then lay down some architecture for us and then move it all? And that's a task, right? That is a task that takes, I'm going to just put numbers on it and say 18 to 24 months. Bottom of the stack to start with, right? And that's what you're talking about with these types of things if you don't get the fundamentals right. And I think the fact that you're just starting to talk about this on the circuit with a kind of, here's a 4-step framework that you can think about approaching this. And it's not about having it all defined, right? Because to an extent, that's the point of it being a framework and not a step-by-step. These are the things that you have to think about. So how has that whole process gone down for you as you've been starting to talk more about it, Luke?
Well, I think we did the usual thing, got into a bit of a panic about no one turning up to our presentation last week, and we had pretty much a full room. So I think people are interested in starting to think about how do we encapsulate all of those elements. And I think I missed the 4th element out. So it's kind of like security, your security posture, the data protection requirements, the data governance, and then you've got ethics and culture, right? Yeah. And then I've started to try and split that out and look at like whether I can, you know, do the usual thing. And does posture fall into a nice acronym that I can use? And we kind of presented something at the end of that, which I'll happily share, but to see if it works. But those 4 elements for us kind of encapsulate your data posture, and they're all of equal importance to ensure that you know what you're doing with the data that you're processing and delivering some sort of output. And if you've got all of those things, you'll never get them all right. No one's 100% compliant, as we know, and anyone that tells you they are is not telling you the truth, right? Because it's perpetual. Case law tests the legislation, so there's changes and guidance that come out that you've got to make to your posture, and that'll be a constant review process. It's a cyclical process, but it seems to be well received. It's got a number of mentions, and people are talking about it, which is what we wanted. We're talking about it and taking it on board, which I think is great. So yeah, and it, for me, what came out of that conference last week in particular, especially with, like I mentioned, the kind of tech summit that was sponsored by Microsoft, lots of conversations about AI. They train on data sets, right? So if your data posture is not right, the output that you will generate will not be accurate or correct. It is dead simple. And we mentioned it before, you don't get the fundamentals right. And we've known it from an analytics perspective, right? If we've got poor data sets with not very accurate data, or, you know, poorly populated data sets, any measurement that you derive from that data set from an analytics perspective just becomes almost meaningless, because the data set is not great going into it. The principles are the same across the board.
Yeah, and George, we talked in the last episode with Miles about how a piece of information can have, I think, over 200 vectors attached to it with an AI element, whereas our brain can cope with about 3. So it doesn't need many of those. It only needs one of those vectors to be a piece of PII or something that relates to a piece of PII, and you've got a whole language learning model that is on shaky ground because of the way that it handles it handles
Yeah.
that kind of data. And I think that's exactly the point that you're making there, is that we just have to be so careful. It's not all the obvious stuff, like making sure it's not on Excel sheets and it's not getting passed around by email, is one side of things. But ultimately, we're passing a lot of our responsibility of the way that we do our jobs to AI, machine learning, large language models.
Yep.
That side of things is going to change the facets of what a DPO needs to know about and what skills they have. So I think, again, even more vital to have a framework to approach it with.
Yeah, exactly. And the adoption, I think, and back to your ethics and culture element of that posture, is truly understanding and not being entirely 100% trusting of its output. There always needs to be some form, currently anyway, right? In the current schema, you've got to verify and review the output from any AI kind of process or application that you've implemented to facilitate some form of task or improvement or efficiency. Because, you know, as we've started talking about, the fundamentals need to be right, and we know full well that the fundamentals in many organizations are not necessarily strong enough to support the trust that people are kind of falling into giving to AI output, and so we've got to balance that.
We're running out of time, but I'm wondering if I can squeeze in just one final question from me, and that is, we touched very briefly, or you touched briefly in recording, on some of the work you were doing with smaller organizations just to help them. But as a small organization, I would find this mind-boggling, and I wouldn't know where to start. And when I'm talking about small organizations, I have worked with organizations with 100 employees plus, that this isn't even on their radar. So are there any quick tips then that you can give us and our audience around how do you get started with this if you're a smaller organization?
Wow,
where do you start?
That I'm not sure I've got any one tip. It's kind of I've been fortunate to partner with organizations that are helping those small businesses kind of get off the ground. So almost from a genuine startup and or support for those small charities or social enterprises. And I think for me, it's been embedding my thinking into those types of organizations who then have helped construct this, data into impact program that I'm running with the East London Business Alliance. And they kind of bring the small businesses in and sort of tell them that this is part of the requirement for them to almost to, get their support from that particular voluntary organization or that organization. And I think that's the place we're going to have to start, unfortunately. And then it's conversation, then it's word of mouth. Then people will start talking to, they'll start talking to their suppliers or their customers who are helping them in that startup phase or running that charity or social enterprise. And we kind of roll from there. But you're right. There are so many organizations, even at that level of employees, that don't really know it. So it's things like this. It's us getting things like this out, conversations like this out, putting them out onto social platforms to try and raise that awareness that, it's a really important thing, right? Data really is almost everything right now in the worlds we live in. And with the onslaught of AI, the onset of AI, it's going to become even more important.
Yeah, exactly. And ignorance will not be an excuse, will it?
No.
I tell you what else is not an excuse. An excuse is running over time for our audience as well, because they booked a 1-hour podcast, right? And that's what they're going to get. So
okay, fine.
I'll tell you what, Luke, we could continue this conversation, and we probably will in the future, in
we definitely
much longer way. But look, I think it's been marvelous to have you here today on Monday afternoon, and the pre-record was great. It's been lovely to have you back. George, absolute pleasure. You got the bad end of the technical stuff today, but there we go. And thank you to everyone in our audience, as per usual, as well, watching on YouTube, LinkedIn Live, and Twitter and Facebook. We really appreciate you chiming in. George, last words from you.
Just look, I think this is right now governance. It's the hot topic of our time. So I'm very grateful that you you spent an hour, 2 hours actually, with us to discuss it. Thank you very much.
It's been an absolute pleasure. You know, anytime with you two, that will be my honour. So yeah, it's been great. Thank you very much, and thank you for giving me the platform to do so. So I appreciate that as well. Thank you.
You're very welcome, Luke, and thank you everyone again. We will see you very soon for the next episode of the Data Mix. Thank you very much. Catch you soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.